We've improved our sound quality. People didn't really like the whispering. So now we have all kinds of machinations to make a more crisp audio experience. Quite beautiful. I'm enjoying it. I'm having a good time. Are we up to chapter 27? I don't think we are to chapter 27. Let's give a look-see. Where are we in this cosmos? This ordering? Where do we exist in the spectrum? Our ideas of substances. We're on page 254 of the original book, 301 of the PDF. I guess we're just going to have to get to the next... let me move this around just so I can see things clearly. Hopefully it doesn't impact the audio quality too much. You're going to hear some crackling, perhaps. Some adjusting. Oh boy, that's a bad one. Gotta really tighten the screws on that. And bring our little windshield right there. Okay. That's looking good. Everything's feeling good. Locke, then what? Well, I've been saying Hume, but we'll see. We'll find out. So we were talking about substances, lodestones. Just jump into it. Powers therefore justly make a great part of our complex ideas of substances. He that will examine his complex idea of gold will find several of its ideas that make it up to be only powers, as the power of being melted, but of not spending itself in the fire, of being dissolved in aqua regia, are ideas as necessary to make up our complex idea of gold as its color and weight, which, if duly considered, are also nothing but different powers. For to speak truly, yellowness is not actually in gold, but is a power in gold to produce that idea in us by our eyes when placed in a due light. And the heat which cannot leave out of our idea of the sun is no more really in the sun than the white color it introduces into wax. These are both equally powers in the sun, operating by the motion and figure of its insensible parts, so on a man, as to make him have the idea of heat, and so on wax, as to make it capable to produce in a man the idea of white. Had we senses acute enough to discern the minute particles of bodies and the real constitution on which their sensible qualities depend, I doubt not but they would produce quite different ideas in us, and that which is now the color, which is the yellow color of gold, would then disappear, and instead of it we should see an admirable texture of parts of a certain size and figure. The now secondary qualities of bodies would disappear if we could discover the primary ones of their minute parts. This microscopes plainly discover to us, for what to our naked eye produces a certain color is, by thus augmenting the acuteness of our senses, discovered to be quite a different thing, and they thus altering, as it were, the proportion of the bulk of the minute parts of a colored object to our usual sight, produces different ideas from what it did before. Thus sand or pounded glass, which is opaque and white to the naked eye, is pellucid in a microscope. And a hair seen this way loses its former color and is in a great measure pellucid, with a mixture of some bright sparkling colors, such as appear from the refraction of diamonds and other pellucid bodies. Blood to the naked eye appears all red, but by a good microscope, wherein its lesser parts appear, shows only some few globules of red swimming in a pellucid liquor. And how these red globules would appear if glasses could be found, that you could magnify them 1,000 or 10,000 times more is uncertain. The infinite wise contriver of us and all things about us hath fitted our senses, faculties, and organs to the conveniences of life and the business we have to do here. We are able by our senses to know and distinguish things and to examine them so far as to apply them to our uses, and several ways to accommodate the exigencies of this life. We have insight enough into their admirable contrivances and wonderful effects to admire and magnify the wisdom, power, and goodness of their author. Such a knowledge as this, which is suited to our present condition, we want not faculties to attain. But it appears not that God intended we should have a perfect, clear, and adequate knowledge of them, that perhaps it is not in the comprehension of any finite being we are furnished with faculties, dull and weak as they are, to discover enough in the creatures to lead us to the knowledge of the Creator and the knowledge of our duty, and we are fitted well enough with abilities to provide for the conveniences of living. These are our business in this world. But were our senses altered and made much quicker and acuter, the appearance and outward scheme of things would have quite another face to us, and I am apt to think would be inconsistent with our being, or at least well-being in this part of the universe which we inhabit. He that considers how little our constitution is able to bear a remove into parts of this air, not much higher than that we commonly breathe in, will have reason to be satisfied that in this globe of earth allotted for our mansion, the all-wise architect has suited our organs and the bodies that are to affect them one to another. If our sense of hearing were but 1,000 times quicker than it is, how should a perpetual noise distract us, and we should in the quietest retirement be less able to sleep or meditate than in the middle of a sea fight? Nay, if that most instructive of our senses seeing were in any man 1,000 or 10,000 times more acute than it is now by the best microscope, things several millions of times less than the smallest object of his sight now would then be visible to his naked eyes, and so he would come nearer the discovery of the texture and motion of the minute parts of corporeal things, and in many of them probably get ideas of their internal constitutions. But then he would be in a quite different world from other people. Nothing would appear the same to him in others. The visible ideas of everything would be different, and so that I doubt whether he and the rest of men could discourse concerning the objects of sight or have any communication about colors, their appearances being so wholly different, and perhaps such a quickness and tenderness of sight could not endure bright sunshine or so much as open daylight, nor take in but a very small part of any object at once, and that too only at a very near distance. And if by the help of such microscopical eyes, if I may so call them, a man should penetrate farther than ordinary into the secret composition and radical texture of bodies, he would not make any great advantage by the change if such an acute sight would not serve to conduct him to the market and exchange, if he could not see things he was to avoid at a convenient distance, or distinguish things he was to do with by those sensible qualities others do. He that was sharp-sighted enough to see the configuration of the minute particles of the spring of a clock, and observe upon what peculiar structure and impulse its elastic motion depends, would no doubt discover something very admirable. But if eyes so framed could not view at once the hand and the characters of the hour plate, and thereby at a distance see what a clock it was, their owner could not be much benefited by that acuteness which, whilst it discovered the secret contrivance of the parts of the machine, made him lose its use. And here give me leave to propose an extravagant conjecture of mine, that since we have some reason, if there be any credit to be given to the report of things that our philosophy cannot account for, to imagine that spirits can attune themselves to bodies of different bulk, figure, and conformation of parts, whether one great advantage some of them have over us may not lie in this, that they can so frame and shape themselves organs of sensation or perception as to suit them to their present design and the circumstances of the object they would consider. Let me take a pause for a moment and see where we are. Everything's working according to plan. Just wanted to double check that. For how much would that man exceed all others in knowledge, who had but the faculty so to alter the structure of his eyes, that one sense as to make it capable of all the several degrees of vision, which the assistance of glasses, casually at first light on, has taught us to conceive? What wonders would he discover, who could so fit his eyes to all sorts of objects, as to see when he pleased the figure and motion of the minute particles in the blood, and other juices of animals, as distinctly as he does at other times the shape and motion of the animals themselves? But to us in our present state unalterable organs so contrived as to discover the figure and motion of the minute parts of bodies, whereon depend those sensible qualities we now observe in them, would perhaps be of no advantage. God has no doubt made them so as is best for us in our present condition. He hath fitted us for the neighborhood of the bodies that surround us, and we have to do with. And though we cannot by the faculties we have attain the perfect knowledge of things, yet they will serve us well enough for those ends above mentioned, which are our great concernment. I beg my reader's pardon for laying before him so wild a fancy concerning the ways of perception in beings above us. But how extravagant soever it be, I doubt whether we can imagine anything about the knowledge of angels, but after this matter some way or other in proportion to what we find and observe in ourselves. And though we cannot but allow that the infinite power and wisdom of God may frame creatures with 1,000 other faculties and ways of perceiving things without them than what we have, yet our thoughts can go no farther than our own, so impossible it is for us to enlarge our very guesses beyond the ideas received from our own sensation and reflection. The supposition, at least, that angels do sometimes assume bodies need not startle us, since some of the most ancient and most learned fathers of the Church seem to believe that they had bodies, and this is certain that their state and way of existence is known to us. But to return to the matter in hand, the ideas we have of substances and the ways we come by them, I say our specific ideas of substances are nothing else but a collection of a certain number of simple ideas considered as united in one thing. These ideas of substances, though they are commonly called simple apprehensions and the names of them simple terms, yet in effect are complex and compounded. Thus the idea which an Englishman signifies by the name swan is white color, long neck, red beak, black legs, and whole feet, and all these of a certain size, with the power of swimming in the water and making a certain kind of noise, and perhaps to a man who has long observed those kind of birds, some other properties which all terminate in sensible simple ideas, all united in one common subject. Besides the complex ideas we have of material sensible substances, of which I have last spoken, by the simple ideas we have taken from those operations of our minds, which we experiment daily in ourselves as thinking, understanding, willing, knowing, and power of beginning, motion, etc., coexisting in some substance, we are able to frame the complex idea of an immaterial spirit, and thus by putting together the ideas of thinking, perceiving, liberty, and power of moving themselves and other things, we have as clear a perception and notion of immaterial substances as we have of material. For putting together the ideas of thinking and willing, or the power of moving or quieting corporeal motion, joined to substance of which we have no distinct idea, we have the idea of an immaterial spirit, and by putting together the ideas of coherent solid parts, and a power of being moved, joined with substance, of which likewise we have no positive idea, we have the idea of matter. The one is as clear and distinct an idea as the other, the idea of thinking and moving a body being as clear as distinct ideas as the ideas of extension, solidity, and being moved. For our idea of substance is equally obscure, or none at all in both. It is but a supposed, I know not what, to support those ideas we call accidents. It is for want of reflection that we are apt to think that our senses show us nothing but material things. Every act of sensation, when duly considered, gives us an equal view of both parts of nature, the corporeal and spiritual. For whilst I know by seeing or hearing, etc., that there is some corporeal being without me, the object of that sensation, I do more certainly know that there is some spiritual being within me that sees and hears. This, I must be convinced, cannot be the action of bare insensible matter, nor ever could be without an immaterial thinking being. By the complex idea of extended figured colored, and all other sensible qualities, which is all that we know of it, we are as far from the idea of the substance of body as if we knew nothing at all, nor after all the acquaintance and familiarity which we imagine we have with matter, and the many qualities men assure themselves they perceive and know in bodies, will it perhaps upon examination be found that they have any more or clearer primary ideas belonging to body than they have belonging to immaterial spirit. The primary ideas we have peculiar to body as contradistinguished to spirit are the cohesion of solid and consequently separable parts and a power of communicating motion by impulse. These, I think, are the original ideas proper and peculiar to body, for figure is but the consequence of finite extension. The ideas we have belonging and peculiar to spirit are thinking and will, or a power of putting body into motion by thought, and which is consequent to it liberty. For as body cannot but communicate its motion by impulse to another body, which it meets with at rest, so the mind can put bodies into motion or forbear to do so as it pleases. The ideas of existence, duration, and mobility are common to them both. There is no reason why it should be thought strange that I make mobility belonging to spirit, for having no other idea of motion but change of distance with other beings that are considered as at rest, and finding that spirits as well as bodies cannot operate but where they are, and that spirits do operate at several times in several places, I cannot but attribute change of place to all finite spirits. For of the infinite spirit I speak not here. For my soul, being a real being as well as my body, is certainly as capable of changing distance with any other body or being as body itself, and so is capable of motion. And if a mathematics, I've forgotten how to say mathematician. If a mathematician, the E is apparently silent, the mathematician. See, now I'm reading things so analytically that I'm forgetting that English spelling is stupid, and it doesn't make sense. In this sense, German is easier. A mathematician can consider a certain distance or a change of that distance between 2 points. One may certainly conceive a distance and a change of distance between two spirits, and so conceive their motion, their approach or removal from one another. Everyone finds in himself that his soul can think, will, and operate on his body in the place where that is, but cannot operate on a body or in a place 100 miles distance from it. Nobody can imagine that his soul can think or move a body at Oxford whilst he is at London. Well, this is very interesting, the concept of movement over distance. Remote control. That nobody could imagine such a thing. And cannot but know that being united to his body, it constantly changes place all the whole journey between Oxford and London, as the coach and horses do that carry him. And I think may be said to be truly all that while in motion, or if that will not be allowed to afford us a clear idea enough of its motion, it being separated from the body in death, I think will. For to consider it as going out of the body or leaving it and yet have no idea of its motion seems to me impossible. If it be said by anyone that it cannot change place because it hath none, for spirits are not in loco but ubi, I suppose that way of talking will not now be much That way of talking will not now be of much weight to many in an age that is not much disposed to admire or suffer themselves to be deceived by such unintelligible ways of speaking. But if anyone thinks there is any sense in that distinction, and that is applicable to our present purpose, I desire him to put it into intelligible English, and then from thence draw a reason to show that immaterial spirits are not capable of motion. Indeed, motion cannot be attributed to God, not because he is an immaterial, but because he is an infinite spirit. Let us compare then our complex idea of an immaterial spirit with our complex idea of body, and see whether there be any more obscurity in one than in the other, and in which most. Our idea of body, as I think, is an extended solid substance capable of communicating motion by impulse. And our idea of soul as an immaterial spirit is of a substance that thinks and has a power of exciting motion in body by will or thought. These, I think, are our complex ideas of soul and body as contradistinguished. And now let us examine which has the most obscurity in it and difficulty to be apprehended. I know that people whose thoughts are immersed in matter and have so subjected their minds to their senses that they seldom reflect on anything beyond them are apt to say they cannot comprehend a thinking thing, which perhaps is true. But I affirm, when they consider it well, they can no more comprehend an extended thing. If anyone say that he knows not what 'tis thinks in him, he means he knows not what the substance is of that thinking thing. No more say I, knows he what the substance is of that solid thing. Farther, if he says he knows not how he thinks, I answer, neither knows he how he is extended, how the solid parts of body are united or cohere together to make extension. For though the pressure of the particles of air may account for the cohesion of several parts of matter that are grosser than the particles of air and have pores less than the corpuscles of air, yet the weight or pressure of the air will not explain nor can be a cause of the coherence of the particles of air themselves. And if the pressure of the ether or any subtler matter than the air may unite and hold fast together the parts of a particle of air, as well as other bodies, yet it cannot make bonds for itself and hold together the parts that make up every the least corpuscle of that materia subtilis. So that hypothesis, how ingeniously soever explained by showing that the parts of sensible bodies are held together by the pressure of another external insensible bodies, reaches not the parts of the ether itself, and by how much the more evidently it proves that the parts of other bodies are held together by the external pressure of the ether, and can have no other conceivable cause of their cohesion and union. By so much more, the more it leaves us in the dark concerning the cohesion of the parts of the corpuscles of the ether itself, which we can neither conceive without its parts, they being bodies and indivisible, nor yet how their parts cohere, they wanting that cause of cohesion, which is given of the cohesion of the parts of all other bodies. But in truth, the pressure of any ambient fluid, how great soever, can be no intelligible cause of the cohesion of the solid parts of matter. For though such a pressure may hinder the avulsion of two polished superficies one from another in a line perpendicular to them, as in the experiment of two polished marbles, yet it can never in the least hinder the separation by a motion in a line parallel to those surfaces, because the ambient fluid, having a full liberty to succeed in each point of space deserted by a lateral motion, resist such a motion of bodies so joined no more than it would resist the motion of that body were it on all sides environed by that fluid, and touched no other body. And therefore, if there were no other cause of cohesion, all parts of bodies must be easily separable by such a lateral sliding motion. For if the pressure of the ether be the adequate cause of cohesion, wherever that cause operates not, there can be no cohesion. And since it cannot operate against such a lateral separation as has been showed, therefore in every imaginary plane, intersecting any mass of matter, there could be no more cohesion than of two polished surfaces, which will always, notwithstanding any imaginary pressure of a fluid, easily slide one from another. So that perhaps how clear an idea soever we think we have of the extension of body, which is nothing but the cohesion of solid parts, he shall well consider it in his mind, he may have reason to conclude that 'tis as easy for him to have a clear idea how the solid thinks as how the body is extended. For since no body is in no farther nor otherwise extended than by the union and cohesion of its solid parts, we shall very ill comprehend the extension of body without understanding wherein consists the union and cohesion of its parts, which seems to me as incomprehensible as the manner of thinking and how it is performed. I allow it is usual for most people to wonder how anyone should find a difficulty in what they think they every day observe. Do we not see? Will they be ready to say, the parts of bodies stick firmly together? Is there anything more common? and what doubt can there be made of it? And the like I say concerning thinking and voluntary motion. Do we not every moment experiment it in ourselves, and therefore can it be doubted? The matter of fact is clear, I confess. But when we would a little nearer look into it and consider how it is done, there I think we are at a loss both in the one place and the other, and can as little understand how the parts of body cohere as we ourselves perceive or move. Let's see where we are here. Give me a moment to figure out what's going on. Okay. I would have anyone intelligibly explain to me how the parts of gold or brass that, but now in fusion, were as loose from one another as the particles of water or the sands of an hourglass, come in a few moments to be so united and adhere so strongly one to another that the utmost force of men's arms cannot separate them. Any considering man will, I suppose, be here at a loss to satisfy his own or another man's understanding. The little bodies that compose that fluid we call water are so extremely small that I never heard of anyone who by a microscope, and yet I have heard of some that have magnified to 10,000, nay, to much above 100,000 times, pretended to perceive their distinct bulk, figure, or motion. And the particles of water are also so perfectly loose from one another that the least force sensibly separates them. Nay, if we consider their perpetual motion, we must allow them to have no cohesion one with another, and yet we let but a sharp cold come, and they unite, they consolidate. These little atoms cohere, and are not without great force separable. He that could find the bonds that tie these heaps of loose little bodies together so firmly, he that could make known the cement that makes them stick so fast one to another, would discover a great and yet unknown secret. And yet when that was done, would he be far enough from making the extension of body, which is the cohesion of solid parts, intelligible, till he could show wherein constituted the union or consolidation of the parts of those bonds, or of that cement, or of the least particle of matter that exists, whereby it appears that this primary and supposed obvious quality of body will be found, when examined, to be as incomprehensible as anything belonging to our minds, and a solid extended substance as hard to be conceived as the thinking immaterial one, whatever difficulties some would raise against it. Hmm. For to extend our thoughts a little farther, that pressure which is brought to explain the cohesion of bodies is as unintelligible to the cohesion itself as the cohesion itself. For if matter be considered, as no doubt it is, finite, let no one send his contemplation to the extremities of the universe, and there see what conceivable hopes, what bond he can imagine to hold this mass of matter in so close a pressure together, from whence steel has its firmness, and the pot of a diamond the hardness and indissolubility. If matter be finite, it must have its extremes, and therefore must be something to hinder it from scattering asunder. If, to avoid this difficulty, anyone will throw himself into the supposition and abyss of infinite matter, Let him consider what light he thereby brings to the cohesion of body, and whether he be ever the nearer making it intelligible, by resolving it into a supposition, the most absurd and most incomprehensible of all other. So far is our extension of body, which is nothing but the cohesion of solid parts, from being clearer or more distinct, when we would inquire into the nature, cause, or manner of it, than the idea of thinking. Another idea we have of body is the power of communication of motion by impulse, and of our souls the power of exciting of motion by thought. These ideas, the one of body, the other of our minds, every day's experience clearly furnishes us with. But if here again we inquire how this is done, we are equally in the dark. For in the communication of motion by impulse, wherein as much motion is lost to one body as is got to the other, which is the ordinariest case, what a beautiful word, ordinariest, we can have no other conception but of the passing of motion out of one body into another, which I think is obscure and unconceivable, as how our minds move or stop our bodies by thought, which we every moment find they do. The increase of motion by impulse, which is observed or believed sometimes to happen, is yet harder to be understood. We have by daily experience clear evidence of motion produced both by impulse and by thought, but the manner how hardly comes within our comprehension. We are equally at a loss in both. So that, however we consider motion and its communication either from body or spirit, the idea which belongs to spirit is at least as clear as that belongs to body. And if we consider the active power of moving, or as I may call it, motivity, it is much clearer in spirit than body, since two bodies placed by one another at rest will never afford us the ideas of power in the one to move the other, but by a borrowed motion, whereas the mind every day affords ideas of an active power of moving of bodies, and therefore it is worth our consideration whether active power be not the proper attribute of spirits, and passive power of matter. Hence may be conjectured that created spirits are not totally separated from matter, because they are both active and passive. Pure spirit, God, is only active. Pure matter is only passive. Those beings that are both active and passive we may judge to partake of both. But be that as it will, I think we have as many and as clear ideas belonging to spirit as we have belonging to body, the substance of each being equally unknown to us, and the idea of thinking in spirit as clear as of extension in body, and the communication of motion by thought which we attribute to spirit is as evident as that by impulse which we ascribe to body. Constant experience makes us sensible of both of these, though our narrow understandings can comprehend neither. For when the mind would look beyond those original ideas we have from sensation or reflection, and penetrate into their causes and manner of production, we find still it discovers nothing but its own short-sightedness. To conclude, sensation convinces us that there are solid extended substances on reflection, that there are thinking ones. Experience assures us of the existence of such beings, and that the one hath a power to move body by impulse, the other by thought. This we cannot doubt of. Experience, I say, every moment furnishes us with the clear ideas, both of the one and the other. But beyond these ideas, as received from their proper sources, our faculties will not reach. If we would inquire farther into their nature, causes, and manner, we perceive not the nature of extension clearer than we do of thinking. If we would explain them any farther, one is as easy as the other, and there is no more difficulty to conceive how a substance we know not should by thought set body into motion, than how a substance we know not should by impulse set body into motion, so that we are no more able to discover wherein the ideas belonging to body consist than those belonging to spirit. From whence it seems probable to me that the simple ideas we receive from sensation and reflection are the boundaries of our thoughts, beyond which the mind, whatever efforts it would make, is not able to advance one jot, nor can it make any discoveries, when it would pry into the nature and hidden causes of those ideas. So that, in short, the idea we have of spirit compared with the idea we have of body stands thus. The substance of spirit is unknown to us, and so is the substance of body equally unknown to us. Two primary qualities or properties of body, solid coherent parts and impulse, we have distinct clear ideas of. So likewise we know and we have distinct clear ideas of two primary qualities or properties of spirit vis-a-vis thinking, and a power of action, i.e. a power of beginning or stopping several thoughts or motions. We have also the ideas of several qualities inherent in bodies and have the clear, distinct ideas of them, which qualities are but the various modifications of the extension of coherent solid parts and their motion. We have likewise the ideas of several modes of thinking vis-a-vis believing, doubting, intending, fearing, hoping, all which are but the several modes of thinking. We have also the ideas of willing and moving the body consequent to it, and with the body itself too, for, as has been showed, the spirit is capable of motion. Lastly, if this notion of immaterial spirit may have perhaps some difficulties in it, not easy to be explained, we have therefore no more reason to deny or doubt the existence of such spirits than we have to deny or doubt the existence of body, because the notion of body is cumbered with some difficulties, very hard, and perhaps impossible to be explained or understood by us. For I would fain have instanced anything in our notion of spirit more perplexed, or nearer a contradiction, than the very notion of body includes in it, the divisibility in infinitum of any finite extension involving us, whether we grant or deny it, and consequences impossible to be explicated or made in our apprehensions consistent, consequences that carry greater difficulty and more apparent absurdity than anything can follow from the notion of an immaterial knowing substance. Oh boy, there's some German going in on the chat here. What's happening? I guess it's just Michael. That's okay. Which we are not at all to wonder at, since we having but some very few superficial ideas of things discovered to us only by the senses from without, or by the mind reflecting on what it experiments in itself within, have no knowledge beyond that, much less of the internal constitution and true nature of things, being destitute of faculties to attain it, and therefore experimenting and discovering in ourselves knowledge and the power of voluntary motion, as certainly as we experiment or discover in things without us the cohesion and separation of solid parts, which is the extension and motion of bodies, we have as much reason to be satisfied with our notion of immaterial spirit as with our notion of body, and the existence of the one as well as the other. For it being no more contradiction that thinking should exist separate and independent from solidity, than it is a contradiction that solidity should exist separate and independent from thinking, they being both but simple ideas independent one from another, and having as clear and distinct ideas in us of thinking as of solidity, I know not why we may not as well allow a thinking thing without solidity, i.e. immaterial, to exist, as a solid thing without thinking, i.e. matter, to exist, especially since it is no harder to conceive how thinking should exist without matter than how matter should think. For whensoever we would proceed beyond these simple ideas we have from sensation and reflection and dive farther into the nature of things, we fall presently into darkness and obscurity, perplexedness and difficulties. We can discover nothing farther but our own blindness and ignorance. But whichever of these complex ideas be clearest, that of body or immaterial spirit, this is evident, that the simple ideas that make them up are no other than what we have received from sensation or reflection, and so is it of all our other ideas of substances, even of God himself. For if we examine the ideas we have of the incomprehensible Supreme Being, we shall find that we come by it the same way, and that the complex ideas we have both of God and separate spirits are made up of the simple ideas we receive from reflection, v.g. having from what we experiment in ourselves, got the ideas of existence and duration, of knowledge and power, of pleasure and happiness, and of several other qualities and powers, which it is better to have than to be without. When we would frame an idea the most suitable we can to the Supreme Being, we enlarge every one of these with our idea of infinite, and so putting them together, making our complex idea of God. For that the mind has such a power of enlarging some of its ideas received from sensation and reflection has already been showed. If I find that I know some few things, and some of them, or all, perhaps imperfectly, I can frame an idea of knowing twice as many, which I can double again as often as I can add to number, and thus enlarge my idea of knowledge by extending its comprehension to all things existing or possible. The same also I can do of knowing them more perfectly, i.e. all their qualities, powers, causes, consequences, and relations, etc. They'll all be perfectly known that is in them, or can any way relate to them, and thus frame the idea of infinite or boundless knowledge. The same may also be done of power till we come to that we call infinite, and also of the duration of existence without being or end, and so frame the idea of an eternal being. The degrees or extent wherein we ascribe existence, power, wisdom, and all other perfections which we have any ideas of, to that sovereign being which we called God, being all boundless and infinite, we frame the best idea of him our minds are capable of. All which is done, I say, by enlarging those simple ideas we have taken from the operations of our own minds by reflection or by our senses, from exterior things to that vastness to which infinity can extend them. For it is infinity which, joined to our ideas of existence, power, knowledge, etc., makes that complex idea, whereby we represent to ourselves the best we can the Supreme Being. For though in his own essence, which certainly we do not know, not knowing the real essence of a pebble or a fly of our own selves, God be simple and uncompounded, yet I think I may say we have no other idea of him but a complex one of existence, knowledge, power, happiness, etc., infinite and eternal, which are all distinct ideas, and some of which, being relative, are again compounded of others, all which being, as has been shown, originally from sensation and reflection, go to make up the idea or notion we have of God. This farther is to be observed that there is no idea we attribute to God, bating infinity, which is not also a part of our complex idea of other spirits, because being capable of no other simple idea belonging to anything but body, but those which by reflection we receive from the operation of our minds, we can attribute to spirits no other, but what we receive from thence, and all the difference we can put between them in our contemplation of spirits is only in the several extents and degrees of their knowledge, power, duration, happiness, etc., for that in our ideas as well of spirit as of other things, we are restrained to those we receive from sensation and reflection is evident from hence, that in our ideas of spirits, how much soever advanced in perfection beyond those of bodies, even to that of infinite, we cannot yet have an idea of the manner wherein they discover their thoughts one to another. Though we must necessarily conclude that separate spirits, which are beings that have perfecter knowledge and greater happiness than we, must needs have also a perfecter way of communicating their thoughts than we have, who are fain to make use of corporeal signs and particular sounds, which are therefore of most general use, as being the best and quickest we are capable of. But of immediate communication, having no experiment in ourselves, and consequently no notion of it all, we have no idea how spirits which use not words can with quickness, or much less how spirits that have no bodies can be masters of their own thoughts, and communicate or conceal them at pleasure. We cannot but necessarily suppose they have such a power. And thus we have seen what kind of ideas we have of substances of all kinds, wherein they consist, and how we come by them. From whence I think it is very evident, first, that all our ideas of the several sorts of substances are nothing but collections of simple ideas, with the supposition of something to which they belong and in which they subsist, though of this supposed something we have no clear distinct idea at all. Secondly, that all the simple ideas that thus united in one common substratum make up our complex ideas of several sorts of substances, and are no other but such as we have received from sensation or reflection, so that even in those which we think we are most intimately acquainted with, and come nearest the comprehension of, our most enlarged conceptions cannot reach beyond those simple ideas, and even those which seem most remote from all we have to do with, and do infinitely surpass anything we can perceive in ourselves by reflection and discover by sensation in other things, we can attain to nothing but those simple ideas which we originally received from sensation or reflection, as it is evident in the complex ideas we have of angels and particularly of God himself. Thirdly, that most of the simple ideas that make up our complex ideas of substances, when truly considered, are only powers. However, we are apt to take them for positive qualities, e.g., the greatest part of the ideas that make our complex idea of gold and yellowness, great weight, ductility, fusibility, and solubility in aqua regia, etc., all united together in an unknown substratum, all which ideas are nothing else but so many relations to other substances, and are not really in the gold considered barely in itself, though they depend on those real and primary qualities of its internal constitution, whereby it has a fitness differently to operate and be operated on by several other substances. Chapter 24 of Collective Idea of Substances. Page 270, 317 in the PDF. Let's see what the chat is doing. Fourth density. Just woke up. Dreamt a priest told an atheist leftist that surely he is not exempt from God's mercy and salvation. First I was moved, but then got angry. Asked him, is he not supposed to be Catholic? We Sagen. I like how Ken's bust is a facet of the book itself now. Yes, my bust, my great bust, is but a facet of the book. Yes, I have become the book. I have no separate identity from the book. He has merged with Locke. LOL, the head looks like it's an alchemical projection speaking to us. We are Locke, we are Legion. Things solid and extended, what? Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Robert Frost. Clap, clap, clap. He is ascending. He won't be with us mere mortald much longer. And behold a pale Kenneth. War Jokkull, der Gartenteich-Springbrunnen. I have no clue. I know a garden something, jumping. Maybe this is a real word we can look up. Gartenteich-Springbrunnen. Well, it certainly is a word. Teich-Springbrunnen. Jokkull. This is weird. I've never heard of this Jokkull. Gartenteich-Springbrunnen. What is this? What is this meme? It is Jokkull, der Gartenteich-Springbrunnen. What is this about? Let's pop in the headphones. So I'm seeing right now some flowers. We're seeing some forest. Background video taken from the performance. It was once a well located in a pond One saw it as the king in its small realm. There was no eye drying. If it remains, it is a large... the garden pond jumping well. He stands for... Okay. This is like half English, half German in the translation. It's not a very good... But this is a very exciting song. I don't know what's going on, to be honest. I think I'm just gonna post this link in the chat. I've never heard of this before. Jokkull. Jokkull. Man. I didn't even know Jokkull was a word, to be honest with you. And it's supposed to be my podcast. I should know about the word. Jokkull, Jacobus. So Jokkull apparently is a derivation from Jacob. So it's a little Jacob. Jacobus is from the Hebrew heel grabber, heel of the foot. Jacob. Akeb, following due to, a preposition. Well, all of that is extremely interesting. So a Garten Teichspringbrunnen apparently is a garden fountain. You gotta love German. I had 2 years of German in high school. It's a funny German song. Ken should clip it for... Yeah, it would be good to clip it as an intro, but I think it's probably copyright, right? Copyright prevents all of that sort of fun stuff. But maybe if we could do a remix of the song, then that would get around that. Musical language. Tiefe Stille herrscht im Wasser, ohne Regung ruht das Meer und bekümmert sieht der Schiffe glatte Fläche ringsumher. Keine Luft von keiner Seite, Todesstille fürchterlich. In der ungeheuren Weite reget keine Welle sich. The Supreme Being, LOL, take out your mason jar, folks. You can't keep getting away with it. C'est un édro, on le pont mangeur de fruits avec une quantité illimitée de maintenance. Il suffit de pousser la maintenance d'un ongle, c'est à volonté, je me contenterai de l'air d'une assiette de fruits non d'alemenes et de bière. That's my best attempt. I definitely can't read Korean. Oh, now we got some Russian. Иногда ми есть речасием люди даже совершенных незнакомцев, которые начинают интересовать нас с первого. Oh, jeez. It's a V, Z, G sound next to each other. So, V, Zg, Zg, and then there's the L. Like, there's no vowels here. It's V, Z, G, L. Vzglayada. That's my best attempt. Kakto Внезапно. Внезапно Priej die ciem zniesut slovo. I know the last word. That's slovo means word. So what an amazing talent I have for languages, right? Bazirano I Crevono Table Tirano. I don't know what language that is. Did the elites read Loki? Who would have guessed that the Germanic trickster god would have had such an impact on American thought? We've got more what looks like Korean or Chinese. I don't know those characters. Greetings, Norman Kelly. I don't know. Every time I tune in, I hear my name. The song is. Let's see what Norman Kelly is about. I gotta pop out, or oh, I can go over to participants maybe, and do it that way. Nope, can't do it from participants. I gotta pop out the chat. This is how terrible YouTube is. Doesn't let me see the same display that you to see. So I have to go here. Then I do go to channel, and then it gives me a fake link. So I have to delete the studio part, and then it brings me to. No, that wasn't my intention at all. This is very strange. Norman Kelly, go to channel. What's gonna happen? It brings me to my channel, which is not what I requested. Oh, YouTube. I have to go into your chat, and I have to go here. Go to channel. You guys have it better than I do. Norman Kelly, 3 subscribers, no playlist. Joined in 2019. Welcome, Norman Kelly. Late to the party. Please tell me who this new persona is. English is Germanic language. It has Creative Commons license. Ask the book club to remix it. He'll do a bang up job. You know, I don't know that you can ask the book club to do things. I think he just does what he wants. Tom Anderson is posting stuff. Should we bother to translate it? I feel like people should be translating this for me, but I guess maybe we can go over to a little Google Translate and see what's being said in this mysterious Asian language. All right. Detect the language, please. It says, hello. Korean was detected. Juwonjang Anyeong Haseyo. And then we've got probably some more Korean here or something. This says, hello. Anyeong Haseyo. And then let's translate the rest of this. Let's translate what the deep stillness lords, like a deep stillness dominates the water. Without rain, the sea is calm, and something sees the flatness of the, I don't know what ringsum hair is. There is deep silence in the water. The sea rests without movement, and the skipper looks troubled at the smooth surface all around. So ringsum hair is all around. No air from no side. Deadly silence is fearful. Gotta turn that off. I'm pretty sure. Horrible silence. In the horrible wide, I thought Raygit would be related to rain, but I guess that's movement. No waves. No wave moves. Okay, in the immense vastness, no waves moves. And then, I think we already translated that. We've got some French here. See what the French is saying about mayonnaise. It is a place where you can eat fries with an unlimited amount of mayonnaise. Just take the mayonnaise from a large something. Take it from a large bucket at will. I settle for a plate of fries drowned in mayonnaise and a beer. Then let's see what the Russian was all about. Sometimes we meet people, even perfect strangers, who begin to interest us at first glance, and somehow, suddenly, before they utter a word. Ah, okay. That's fair. Let's see what language fourth density is posting. Base and red. Apparently that's Croatian. Thank you, fourth density. We've got some more Korean here. Long live the Chosun dynasty. Dai Joseongung Manse. Late to the party, and then we've got some more Korean here from Tom Anderson. Just ruler of the Korean Peninsula. Juwangjan Gimjeong Eun Hab Bandoi Jeong Danghang Tong Chija. When I heard him say "v," I felt that you banned me because of troublemakers. Sounds like the old TV 9000 stuff. Kluge kleine Katzen kratzen keine Krokodile. Does that mean hit no cats? Something no. What's kratzen mean? Clever little cats. Oh, Kluge kleine Katzen. Kluge kleine Katzen kratzen keine. So clever little cats don't scratch crocodiles. Essel essen nesseln nicht. Nesseln essen essel nicht. I think, or maybe it's ezel. Like an easel does not eat a nesseln? I don't know what a nesseln is. Donkeys don't eat nettles. Nettles don't eat... it's not an easel. It's a donkey. Donkeys don't eat needles. Okay. Moon rune language. I am zero infinity. Zero infinity live 2. Okay, well, I hope you've improved your behavior. Schnecken erschrecken, wenn sie an Schnecken schlecken, weil zum Schrecken viele Schnecken nicht schmecken. I don't know what Schnecken is. Sounds like a snake or something. Something is fearful if it something I don't know what these words are. Let's see. A Schnecken. Snails are frightened when they lick snails, because to frighten many snails do not taste. Okay. Ash esu lietevis irmoku Schneketi tris kalbas. Which language is that? Lithuanian. I am Lithuanian and speak 3 languages. Cool. Google Translate is improving but still mediocre. Nordisk moment of truth. Mansai. Modern science is actually a rogue branch of philosophy that now thinks it can survive without the metaphysics. Up until the 1800s, they were called natural philosophers and did geography, biology. There's some truth to that. Even if you disagree with me. I think, when you hear an anti-metaphysician and Nietzschean talk about metaphysics, they talk about science as a way of escaping metaphysics, which is interesting. Mansai is the Korean for banzai. Natural philosophers also did metaphysics, epistemology, languages, physics, and so on. Increased speciation and specialized scientists with no idea of philosophy. A lot of Schnecken in there. In Chinese, it's Wansui. Being a natural philosopher is where it's at. Simplified Chinese was a huge innovation. Zhongguo Wansui means Banzai China or long live China. They also say Zuguo Wansui, meaning long live the motherland. Simplified Chinese is better. Simplified Chinese is so simple it can be learnt in a week. Oh, that's a pretty strong claim there. So we have two choices here. I guess we can read a little more of what language this is. I was about to close everything out. Bijela dziewojka sa debelom guzikom. So, looks kind of Slavic. Is this still Croatian? All right. Well, we can't. I guess Biela dziewuchka. That's the part that I know. Biela dziewuchka v bolshoi popa. That would be the Russian equivalent. But that is quite rude. We should not be talking about Bolshoi Popa or Debilom Guzikom. We shouldn't be talking about that. That is lewd. Traditional characters is useful if you're reading old text, but for daily use, traditional characters are a lot less tedious. Or simplify. I don't know why. I didn't know I had this huge Korean, Japanese, I guess they're Chinese speakers. I did not know I had this huge Chinese audience. Although that's good to know, you know. It's good to know. I guess the people who identify with the West don't like China. You know, Trump doesn't like China. The Nancy Pelosi doesn't like China. Democrats don't like China. Republicans don't like China. Nobody really seen it. Libertarians don't like China. Racist people don't like China. Liberals don't like China. I mean, China is pretty much... There's no one in the West or in America that really likes China, that's really happy with China. In totality. I mean, I guess you could say that there are certain people who do like China. But I guess I'm always a contrarian. I always feel like everybody hates China. I should like China. You know what I mean? And China certainly does have this very... It has gone through scientific industrialization, and it's managed to control its people in a way that they don't have a lot of the problems that the West has. They've restricted the flow of information. They've restricted a lot of the, you know, what we might call the liberal freedom that we have in the West. Now, ultimately, I guess the question is which system is going to win out, because if you shield your people from the liberal freedom of the West, then you kind of make yourself vulnerable and fragile, because that's dependent upon the centralization of the Chinese government. If that can be undermined, then Chinese society will collapse quite rapidly, which we saw in the 19th century. We've seen millions and millions of people die in China in the 19th century in the Civil War. And then, of course, World War II, you also saw millions of Chinese die. So China has gone through, in the last 200 years, has really gone through extreme periods of violence. And the centralization of the Chinese government does present a kind of fragility that might allow for the Chinese government, or for the Chinese people, to return to that level of violence in the coming century. You know, I can't quite tell, but China is interesting. You know, everyone should at least be curious about what's going on over there, because it is something unique. I mean, the Chinese alphabet. There's really only three major alphabets in the world: the Latin alphabet, the Arab well, I guess we could say the Hindu alphabet as well, because the Latin alphabet, the Hindu alphabet, the Arabic alphabet, and the Chinese alphabet, which then came into Japan. Now, I know Japan has its own sort of separate alphabet and a phonetic alphabet rather than the characters of China. But really, a lot of the Japanese alphabets derive from the Chinese alphabet. So if you look at these different sort of language families, these are, I guess, the four main alphabets that are operating in the world right now. And I guess Cyrillic with the Russian alphabet. But if we sort of etymologically look at the origins of these alphabets, the Cyrillic alphabet is ultimately derived in many ways from the Greek alphabet, and the Latin alphabet's derived from the Greek alphabet. So if we understand that Cyrillic and Latin are really both Greek-derived, then we say, well, we essentially have the Greek-descended alphabets, the Arabic-descended alphabets, Maybe you could throw Hebrew in there and say Semitic alphabet. So we have Greek, Semitic, Hindu, and Chinese. And those are the 4 alphabets of the world. The Greek alphabet, it continues to make gains in places like Turkey and even Kazakhstan. I believe they've switched over to the Latin alphabet. Um, Mongolia, they've got the Cyrillic alphabet. As people learn English more and more, the Latin alphabet's going to become more and more popular. So really, the only alternatives you have, I mean, in India, they learn English very frequently, but they still have the Hindu alphabet. They still have the Arabic alphabet, and it's like these are the 4 big blocks, the 4 big civilizational blocks: the Greek descended, the Semitic, the Hindu, and the Chinese. So those are the 4. Now, if you look at the Hindu and the Greek, you can say, well, they're both Indo-European. So then we can collapse this into a simpler system of 3. We can say we've got the Indo-European alphabets, we've got the Semitic alphabets, and we have, broadly speaking, the Chinese or Asian alphabets. And those are the 3 big blocks. Now, in the West, because we have the Hebrew Bible still as part of the canon of the Christian church, there is still a connection to Hebrew and learning Hebrew and that sort of thing. So in the West, I think we're familiar with the Semitic and the Indo-European, but we're not so familiar with the East Asian or the Chinese. So that would make it worth going out of your way, because it's not something you really get exposed to every day. Not that I have done it myself, but it's an interesting concept. You can learn Korean characters in a day. Too strong acclaim. I stood alone beneath the stars and shouted to the heavens at the top of my lungs. And what was so beautiful was the way the stars shined when the sky swallowed your name. I kept hearing infinity every time I tuned in. Okay, now I hear what you're saying. A veritable polyglot. Read the analects next. What are the analects? Is that Chinese? Is this Greek? What are the analects? The analects are these Chinese sayings. I don't know that I will be reading the analects. Again, my next reading, I was going to read something from Hume. I don't know what I should read of Hume, but I was going to read something from Hume next. And I would be very open if people want to pay me in lemons. I would be happy to read pretty much anything that is appropriate and not copyrighted, something like the Analects. I would be open to that. But I'm not. Let's see. If each video is an hour and it takes me like 10 videos to complete the book, then each video is actually more like up to 4 hours. So I would say we're talking like $40 per video, 10 videos, like $400 to read a video. This is the kind of I'm open to it if people really want me to hear something read aloud, but we're probably not going to read the Analects. Cosmopolitans, China must be doing something right. Begin at the beginning and go on till you come to the end, then stop. I, for one, welcome our new Sino overlords. Speaking Korean is another matter. Imagine falling so low you get Sino overlords. China collapsed in the 19th century because it was a barbarian Manchu regime. Qing Dynasty. Okay. 5-1. Chinese Civil War was the weirdest thing ever. Now it's a Han regime, so it's inherently more stable. Okay, that's a fair point. Before Mao, China was a collapsed backwards-looking agrarian empire. Now it is more powerful than any other empire, save for America, which is on the decline. Yeah, but China's fortunes are kind of tied to America. I've talked about this before, and we've probably gotten into this argument before. But I don't see how China can surpass America because of the economics of the trade between China and America. I speak the oldest living Indo-European language. That's not correct. So when we say that something like Lithuanian or the Baltic languages are quote unquote older, We mean is they preserved a lot of forms of the language which are more archaic. And Russian is very similar. Russian has a number of cases and genders and tenses, and it doesn't just have the singular and the plural, but in some cases you've reserved the singular, the plural, or singular, dual, and then in some cases you even have the tertiary and the plural. So if you say one ball, two ball, and it has a special ending, three ball has a special ending, and then four, five, six, seven would be the plural. So that is what we mean when we say that these languages are archaic and perhaps closer in certain grammatical senses or syntactical senses to the quote unquote original theoretical, hypothetical, reconstructed Indo-European language. But of course, English, in a sense, is just as old because English is derived from German, and German is one of the early Indo-European branches, or we could do it with any of the, like, Greek. How long has Greek been around? How long has any of these been around? They've all been around, they've made changes, and so has Lithuanian. Lithuanian today is probably indistinguishable from Lithuanian several thousand years ago. But maybe Lithuanian has been more stable over time because Lithuanian has not, like English, had so many substratum brought into it. So English has been through a number of modifications because you've had social, political, cultural influxes of different peoples into this area. You had first pre-Indo-Europeans, Celts, you had Anglo-Saxons, then you had Nordic Vikings, and then you had French-speaking Normans, and then you had the World Empire of Britain. You had the Latin and Greek religious study of Christian literature, which led to a change in the English language from the top down. You had all kinds of influxes of different words from around the world. You had a French influence. You had a German influence. You had, again, the Greek and Latin influence. So there are all these different influences there with English that I guess Lithuania, is it really something to be proud of? This conservatism of the Lithuanian language that it's just been the same for all time. Now, of course, if you're Lithuanian, you want something to be proud of. So you say, oh, I speak the oldest living Indo-European language. But is that something to be proud of, that you've been so peripheral, that you've been so sequestered off in your own little world that you haven't changed at all? Is that a sign of power? Is that a sign of greatness? Is that a sign of good, that you have avoided any change? Whereas English, the English language, is the center of world power, and at the same time, it's one of the newest languages in the sense that it's changed so much over time as to be unrecognizable. The English of Chaucer. I mean, even the English of Locke. When I talk about Locke, he's kind of... But, maybe the reason Locke is incomprehensible is the same reason that, like, when smart people talk about science, it's somewhat incomprehensible. English has this speciation to it where there's a specialization of terms in each distinct discipline so that people can't understand it. It's like learning philosophy is like learning a new language. What does ontology mean? What does phenomenology mean? What does epistemology mean? And how do we use these words? It's kind of like learning a new language. Let's move on. Back during Imperial China times, Japanese emissaries would write in kanji to communicate with the Chinese emissary. Lebanese like to use Latin alphabet. Kazakhs left Cyrillic behind. I don't know why the Kazakhs chose Latin, because Latin is popular. Anglo-loyalists rise up. China now has the largest number of native English speakers of all nations. Then there is the alphabet invented by Bam Margera. Who is Bam Margera? He is a former professional skateboarder. Yeah, I don't know that he has made an alphabet. Strigoli? What does that mean? I don't know what any of this means. Vincent Margera is better than Bob Margera. It sounds like a wrestler. Is he a wrestler? Is that a stereotype? Vincent Margera was a TV personality. Okay. Interesting. Greek and Arabic alphabets come from Phoenician. Well, if that's true, then we really have Phoenician alphabets, and then we have Chinese alphabets, which is kind of incredible. If you put it in that dual sense, it's like there are only two alphabets in the world, Phoenician derived and Chinese derived. And then you kind of got to be impressed by the Chinese, that literally every single alphabet in the world is derived from Phoenician, except for the Chinese. Traditional Confucian scholars are becoming popular, promoted by the CPC, although reservedly, but it's more like Imperial Japan ideology that's becoming mainstream now in China. Radical Marxist BTFO'd. About to pay Kenneth 3 lemons to read about interdimensional aliens. Yeah, I will. Let's see. So 60, let's say 60 divided, or 10 divided by 60. Let's see if I can do math today. 16 cents. 16 cents times 60 is about 10 bucks an hour. So 16 cents per minute is the going rate. So if you want me to read something for a minute, that will cost 16 cents, which we'll just say, for the sake of it, we'll just say that's 16 lemons. So for 16 lemons, we could say I'll say a lemon per, yeah, let's just make it per minute. 16 lemons per minute. We could even round it off and say 15 lemons per minute. So that would be per hour, 900 lemons per hour. And then if we do 40 hours of reading, which is like a book, 36,000 lemons to read a book. So those are the conversion rates there. The Georgian alphabet. China is less tied to America these days. A lot of trade is with the EU, East Asia, and ASEAN, but the US market is still a strong consumer market, just not wholly reliant. I don't know what that means. China is less tied to America these days, as opposed to what days? Like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And then you say a lot of trade is with the EU. Well, if America collapses, the EU is going to totally change. I mean, there's just a lot there that makes me question if China has an independent future of growth without the West broadly. And I'm not speaking simply of America. If America declines, I mean, then it's going to be the European Union. That's going to be the power that China is dependent on. I don't know that China can escape this kind of dependence on the West and become an autarky that also grows. The thing is, I think China can be an autarky, but I don't think it can grow and be an autarky at the same time. Do you understand what I'm saying here? You can disagree, that's just my opinion. Chinese is a non-alphabetic script representing concepts, not sounds. Hanfu nationalism. Once Japan regains their samurai culture, China will not stand a chance. That's not true. That is just absolutely not true. In a number of meanings. Vienas litas du litu tris litai. So we're demonstrating 1 litas, 2 litas, 3 litas. And what is a litas? I don't know what a litas is. Litas doesn't tell me what a litas is. Let's see on Wiktionary. It kind of sounds litu, litas, litu, litai. What is a litas? Is it a Lithuanian? Oh, it is a currency of Lithuania. One belt, one road, BTF America, sea lanes. I don't know that you're ever gonna BTFO the sea lanes entirely. Like, sea lanes are pretty powerful. They're pretty they are pretty powerful. See, one belt, one road. The thing about that is, as we've learned in war, if you have a road or a train track or anything in that case, it's much easier to disrupt. I just cracked myself. It's much easier to disrupt a land route than it is to disrupt a sea route. So land routes are much more susceptible to bombing and to mining and to all sorts of problems. Sea routes, I mean, with the Persian Gulf being an exception to this, but generally the open ocean, controlling the open ocean and having sea power is very powerful on a global scale. Whereas like making a road or a train or whatever the Chinese plan on doing, I don't know how quickly that's actually going to come to pass, that the one overtakes the other. Let's check on if everything... I see I am obscuring the page. Japan is a small country compared to contemporary China. They don't stand much of a chance. Japan has never been successful in trying to conquer China. Always they get owned by attrition in the mainland. It's not to say that, like, if World War II went a different way, that Japan would not be currently dominant over China. I mean, there's all kinds of alternative histories people can get into about the past or what could have been, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, where we stand today is that Japan is a hopelessly sick society, which is going to collapse in the very near future. I mean, it's like certain to collapse. Like, there's no way Japan gets out of this other than if the Japanese, basically what Japanese society is going to become is it's a bunch of robots that care for sick, dying old people. And that's not really a powerful society. Japan is totally inward looking. It's trying to solve its own problems. It's not trying to expand it. These are like spiritual problems. This is not merely like, oh, well, if only, the Americans weren't occupying, or if only they just need to get their samurai spirit back. You can't just get your spirit back. You can't just say, oh, well, it's time to get our spirit back now. That's not really a decision that you have. And you can't, it's almost impossible to change material conditions internally in order to achieve that. Now, externally, you can maybe achieve that in some way. But I don't see if America left, the Japanese changing their spirit. I mean, you have to remember also, the early 20th century was this unique period of weakness for China, and Japan was at a unique point of strength. And so they kind of intersected each other in a way that Japan could make use of that ultimate weakness of China and try to take over, and they still failed. So again, if things had gone the other way, so for instance, if World War II had turned out differently, then maybe Japan could have conquered China in a sense. But that would have, I mean, you have to think about the probabilities and the luckiness involved there for something like that to happen. I think that was a very unique case, and I don't think a situation like that's going to come to pass again, where Japan is so totally weak, and China is so totally weak, and and I'm getting everything mixed up here. Japan is so strong, and China is so weak. That's what I'm trying to say. Who are you thinking will win the Australian Open? I haven't been following. If that's tennis, I have not been following for several years. Or more, or like 10 years. Chinese script words, concepts, not sounds. An alphabet has to represent phoneme sounds. Okay, Napoleonov, I take your point, but okay, so let's call it a script instead of an alphabet. I mean, the alphabet is just the colloquial term for a script. When I say alphabet, I just mean a script, okay? So my point still stands. How long until the Lithuanian people and language go extinct? That's an interesting question. When everyone learns, I would say if you look at Europe right now, you look at young people, upwards of 90% of young people in the European Union understand English fluently and speak it fluently. The problem is that older people do not. So you go to several countries in Europe where young people, like in Germany or Western Europe, young people will speak English. 90% of them can survive totally on English, but yet the 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds don't know what's going on. So this being the case, all of those older people are going to have to die off in order for English to replace the native language. So let's say people above the age of 30 in 2020, and let's say these people are going to no longer be a part of the cultural landscape in 70 years. So by 2090, I guess, is when a lot of these smaller languages in Europe are going to go extinct. A very similar thing happened in Wales, happened in Cornwall, happened in Ireland, so this is not something new, but it is something that will probably happen by the end of this century. You're going to start to see some languages going extinct or nearly extinct to the point where young people are just learning English and they're not really learning, Lithuanian or Estonian or something like that. Going back up here, many lemons shall be given, but you must master the onion first. I think I have mastered the onion several times. I don't know what more I need to do with onions. The font of Locke also looks more Germanic. If he eats onions on stream, I might be more inclined to donate lemons on stream. I don't know that lemons are actually very healthy to eat for your stomach. That might be a little bit too masochistic, right? But Bam Margera invented an alphabet. Esperanto will catch on. Everyone will see. How does Ken not know about Viva La Bam? I'm not clued in. 3 lemon curveballs was sent by the Pemulis. Pemulis sounds either Lithuanian or Greek. Technically, Chinese script like Egyptian hieroglyphics is a logograph or logogram script representing words or phrases as opposed to an alphabetic script that gives clues to pronouncing words. Okay, so we're talking about scripts, okay? We're talking about scripts. You have the Phoenician and you have the Chinese. Those are the 2 scripts in the world. That is my point. How many lemons to read some self-authored Kenneth Brown erotic fan fiction? I think we're going to have to put a premium on that. I think we'd have to say, if I said to read a book, I said 36,000 lemons to read a book. I think we just add on another 0 there to make that 36 or 360,000 lemons. We'd add on a 10 times 10 premium. And it also probably couldn't go on DLive or YouTube because that might be against the terms of service. But that you'd need a prepayment for that one. I'm joking, of course. Just be yourself. Yes, 10, 20 years ago, China is a different country from 10 years ago. China is pioneering quantum computing and AI. Autarky is fine. Well, I mean, if you're correct, then anything is possible, right? Anything is possible. If China is just doing its own thing and it doesn't need America anymore, it doesn't need anybody else, and it's doing just fine, then maybe China is the future. Maybe we should all be learning Chinese, and maybe we're about to be ruled over. Maybe China is going to win and everybody else is going to lose, and that's just the way it's going to be. But I do think you're starting to see a reaction from both Democrats and Republicans. I think you've got Steve Bannon types and you've got Nancy Pelosi types, and you've got pretty much everyone is angry at China. You get the far right angry at China, you got the far left angry at China. The one thing that seems to be able to unite American society in the broader Western world is being anti-China, anti-censorship, anti-authoritarianism. China is the opposite of the West. And so if the West can kind of get its act together, and that's a tall order, but if the West can get its act together to essentially declare all-out Cold War on China, that is sanctioning China, undermining China, funding all kinds of espionage and revolution against China, basically treating China in the same way that we treat Iran currently. if the West can get its act together to do that, then maybe China can be quashed. Although the question is the West going to do that? Does it have an interest in doing that? Or are Western elites actually happy to be integrated into the Chinese elite? And that we could get a kind of fusion of the two systems. I think that might be what we're headed toward, is basically China dominating the world, and the Bill Gates and the Mark Zuckerberg and everyone else just integrate themselves into the Chinese elite, and China becomes a multiracial society. That might be something that is possible. The samurai is and was the ultimate warrior. Okay, I mean, I'm not that big of a weeaboo that I think about that too much. One samurai can easily take out 50 to 100 Chinese. I mean, that's just not historically accurate, really. But I mean, you could say that a man with a sword can take. You could say that a European knight could take out 100 civilians. I mean, yeah, or mass shooters. We had the Las Vegas mass shooting. One mass shooter in Las Vegas could take out hundreds of civilians or something like that. But yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know where this fetishization of the samurai comes from. I'm about to ban squiggly letters. I don't know that we should ban the squiggly letters. We've got to be tolerant. Litas is the national currency. Unarmed Chinese peasants. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Unarmed Chinese peasants, and the samurai go in, they're just killing random, poor people. I don't think of that as being like the ultimate warrior. To be honest, if you had to ask me who is the ultimate warrior on planet Earth, it would be the group of people who are tallest and the group of people who are strongest physically. And I do not think of the Japanese when I think of the people who are tallest and strongest. Alternatively, you could think of the people who are best at creating technology with which to wage war, which again, I would think of Western nations as having created the best technology for waging war, not the Japanese. So really, by any metric, whether it's the ability to be tall and strong and fast, or whether it's the ability to create warfaring technology, I don't think the Japanese come number one in either of those qualitatively. Now, quantitatively, the Chinese, of course, have the biggest army on the planet as a single country, which is pretty impressive. So we always have to balance out our qualitative arguments with our quantitative arguments. A modern international economy, credit is tribute. If you rack up billions in foreign debt without terrific issue, it's a pretty good sign you're running the world. Yeah, this is why I'm reconsidering neoconservatism, because, which I really haven't been considering, I guess, since like the early Bush years, where maybe I was neutral or open to it or something like that. But I pretty quickly turned against it, especially when Obama came around and provided an alternative. So I've been pretty hostile to neoconservatism for a long while. But I'm starting to think that, they're really, again, we've sort of laid out, there's really only two systems in the world. There's the Western system and the Chinese system. And you've got to ask yourself, like, which do you want to, because there's no like, oh, well, we're just going to do our own thing and we're not going to be part of any system. That's not an option. That's a daydream. That's a lie, if you believe that's possible. So you're either with the Chinese or you're with the West. And if you think you're against the West and against the Chinese, then you're probably just for the Chinese and against the West, basically. Those are the two big things, and going off and doing your own thing isn't really an option. This is something that I'm considering. So if all of that is true, then foreign wars, even though I personally like the people of Iran and don't want to see them bombed into oblivion, and even though I, like the, secular culture in the Middle East, and I don't like to see the rise of ISIS and things like that. It's like, well, it's almost the way that people talk about Trump. It's a binary choice. You either choose the Republicans or the Democrats. There's no third option. There's no third position. That doesn't exist in this reality. And so You just got to choose one or the other. So if that's the choice, it's like, well, I guess we are neoconservatives now. But it's something I have to think about. It's something I have to work through. Because it's a pretty significant departure. I mean, I've been anti-war in some way or another, again, since I would say since I first heard of Ron Paul and Obama opposing the war. I was like, oh, there you can actually oppose the war in the Middle East. And I started looking into the subject, and I got really sympathetic toward Middle Easterners. And I said, so I guess it's been like 12 years that I've been anti-war in general and not pro neoconservatism, but some things are making me question that position. In modern international economy, oh, we already read that. BRI is about strengthening land power versus maritime power. So is that the Bumpkin Road Initiative? The Based Road Initiative? Belt and Road Initiative. So it is a strategy. Silk Road. What's going on with this? The target has the project has a targeted completion of 2049. Okay, that is very far in the future. That's like incredibly far into the future. Very strange. But we could read more about that later. Or we could read more about it now. I mean, I don't think people want to hear me read Wikipedia, though. But there's some interesting stuff going on that we could look into. Maybe that's a separate stream. Maybe that deserves its own, I don't know what we would say, kind of focused analysis. All right, so to get back to this, all Chinese are unarmed against Japanese forged samurai sword steel. There is basically no defense. Okay, yeah, I mean, swords. Is this what I don't get it. I personally don't understand the obsession with swords. It's very inactive. I mean, it's very conservative, right? Oh, swords. Swords are awesome. Swords are cool. It's very strange. Ming Dynasty defeated the peak of samurai warrior culture in Japan. Toyotomo's Hideyoshi's armies in 1598. The Chinese are using the land belt and the sea road, one belt and one road. The Ming Dynasty subverted samurai culture years before the conflict. That is common knowledge if you read anything besides Communist Party propaganda. Well, I don't know. Talking about like the samurai sword as being really good. Like, did you know that the samurai sword was like the strongest sword ever, and that like they had to forge it like several different times in order for it to be so strong, and like it was so stronger than anything. Like, oh man, I wish I was Japanese. I wish I was samurai and I could just have a samurai sword. I've never really bought into that. I don't know where it comes from. Japan needs dishwashers. Yeah, they need dishwashers that just have no environmental regulation whatsoever. Westerners are suffering from a spiritual malaise that is arguably worse than the one afflicting the Japanese. You could say in some cases, perhaps. I mean, in terms of a contest, look, at least what I can say for the West is that there's there's a high-low versus the middle logic behind the spiritual malaise, in that there's a kind of Darwinism of the spiritual malaise, and that it's only affecting parts of the population, not all the population, whereas in Japan it just seems to be affecting everybody. Although I haven't seen the data in Japan. You know, in Japan also is not accepting in immigrants. So that's a big problem as well for Japan. I mean, if you're to look at it strategically, you could make the argument that by causing the middle class to be suicidal, you are opening a path for, you know, a revolution or a change in consciousness in the West, that you're opening up a way for a high-low versus the middle, where there only exists an upper class and a lower class. There is no middle class, and that's going to result in this new kind of aristocracy and this new kind of absolutism and ultimately the lower class is then going to be done away with because they'll no longer be useful once the middle is destroyed. And then basically you're going to have a society made up of geniuses. That is maybe what you could say about the West if we're going to defend what's going on. Whereas in Japan, I don't know that that's the strategy. I mean, maybe they're plugged into that strategy in one way or another. But I don't know. There's some cases where you could say it's better, some cases where you could say it's worse. But it certainly does seem to be following the West. Whereas the West seemed to have innovated its own demise, Japan just seems to be following along for the ride, and Korea as well. Japan was in a century-long unification war before, with Toyotomi Hideyoshi being victorious. One of his lieutenants took over from him when he died in 1598. Tokugawa Ieyasu and Tokugawa shogunate. Ming Dynasty didn't care about Japan prior to 1592 invasions. 960 lemons per hour equals $3.56 per hour with a lemon kilo price of $9. That's decent living. 960 lemons is not a lot at all. I have 200 lemons right now in the bank. 200 lemons is like $2. You don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Nordisk. Moving to Florida and buying a lemon grove. Lemons are our new currency. Japan may end up being robots taking care for sick old people. The West will end up being third worlders caring for sick old people. Okay, what's the difference? Maybe the robots are actually worse in a way. Touche. Maybe elderly folks in the West can learn some Tagalog. I don't know that it's going to be Tagalog predominantly. The point at which people start trying to save a language from being lost is surely past the point of no return. That's a good point. I guess there is a case to be made for Japanese samurai in Ming Dynasty being more class to equal. They can enjoy chicken adobo while they live out their last days. Pork adobo is better. Military. Samurai can slice a tank in half. Keep coping, Westerners. Total war. Chinese peasants will not. I don't think I can even read this. This is bad, Michael Pemulis. This like Japanese chauvinism is just, it's bordering on racism against Chinese people. I don't know if I can accept this. You might have to repent. Japanese steel is folded 10 to the 67th times. It can slice through anything, literally. Chinese fanboys don't understand. Reject false dichotomies. I don't even understand what the Chinese system is. I don't mind illiberal Confucian scholars. Giant power blocks exist with power blocks inside power blocks. Tyler Cohen. Who is Tyler Cohen? Let's look up Tyler Cohen. Let's see who he is. Tyler Cohen, Marginal Revolution. He is an American. He says he finds markets in everything. Personal philosophy, libertarian. He supports same-sex marriage. Criticism, attack. He was pepper sprayed. A citizen's arrest was attempted on him. That is so weird. Cohen testified his attacker believed Cohen controlled his mind at a distance and harassed him. Oh, that's really weird. Who is this guy? He is of Irish ancestry. That's cool. So he made the point that social dissatisfaction over worsening standards of living will be muted by us having China whipped up as our common national enemy. So there's still room for differentiation within power blocks. U.S. technically fought China twice, once directly through Korea, twice via proxy Vietnam. Sure, the former might have been a win for the U.S. if they used nukes, but that's nukes. America can't even beat goat herders wearing flip-flops and wielding 50-year-old Kalashnikovs. That's just not true. That's just stupid. This is so stupid. The idea that the American military's goal was to defeat the Taliban in Afghanistan is so stupid. It is so superficial. It is something that a child would believe. Oh, well, we're still there, so I guess we just couldn't win. Well, maybe the objective was to set up a permanent occupation in the same way that we have one in Germany and Japan. In that sense, we're winning in Afghanistan. It's just a very stupid thing to say. They can, but they use them strategically. Glad I'm not Japanese. Asymmetric warfare has rendered trillion-dollar carrier groups irrelevant. Again, that is so stupid. That is so stupid. The idea, oh, well, America couldn't achieve its stated objectives. Therefore, I'm sure that the American military was just openly stating its objectives and being completely honest about its intentions. It's not true. That's not the case. That's the opposite of the case. I am the coolest ethnic combination imaginable. Japan's heyday was just the late 1970s, early 1990s. It's been a depressing society ever since. South Korea is all right. Park Hwang-hee tried to align a lot with China actually in the 14 to 16 period, encouraged Confucian studying by Chi-coms in South Korean universities. South Korea is not all right. Our tech industry is more dynamic compared to Japan, which is more depressing. Samsung and Hinks make 60 to 70% of the world's semiconductor RAM chips. Vietnam lost millions of lives at starvation, malnutrition, birth defects, social unrest, whereas LBJ simply diverted a little bit of cash off the Great Society. Yeah, and Vietnam won. Number of enemy dead is irrelevant McNamara fallacy. Tom Anderson, you have no clue what you're talking about if you think Vietnam won the Vietnam War. What is the outcome of the Vietnam War? The outcome is that Vietnam is today, well, it's divided between China and America, I suppose, in terms of influence. I'm sure China has some kind of influence in Vietnam. I'm sure the influence isn't zero. But at the same time, America has a great deal of influence in Vietnam. So the idea that we lost that war, no. American capital operates freely in Vietnam. Vietnam is essentially a capitalist society, a market-integrated society. We won Vietnam. We did not lose Vietnam. What was the objective? What was the purpose of Vietnam? The Vietnamese War, the war in Vietnam, the goal was not to defeat Ho Chi Minh and take North Vietnam, and all of these stated goals were not the real goals. The goal, first and foremost, was to engage in data collection. Data collection in terms of war tactics, data collection in terms of psychological research. The war gave a cover for a lot of psychological experiments. The war was there because the military wanted to practice. It wanted to experiment. It wanted to try out different things. The goal of that war was not to, we're going to kill Ho Chi Minh and we're going to take over North Vietnam and we're going to have a capitalist society. I mean, if that was the goal, it has been achieved in 2020. Ho Chi Minh is dead and Vietnam is a market integrated. There was just a video I watched where if you've ever seen that famous picture of a little naked girl and she's screaming and because she's been burned by napalm and it's a horrible picture, by the way. I don't even think I should really be describing it. It's too explicit. But that woman has grown up and she's become a Christian. So the West won in Vietnam. America won in Vietnam. The idea that, who lost? Well, the soldiers lost, right? Because the soldiers came home to a bunch of hippies who hated them, and American conservatism and traditional marriage and all of that was destroyed. And it was the 1960s. So in that sense, you can say the American middle class lost Vietnam, but the American elite won Vietnam. So when you say we lost Vietnam, you have to define the terms we, and you have to define the conditions of winning. Hair is getting a little bit crazy here. Okay, let's go back. Not if America actually wanted to win. America could win if they wanted to. Cope harder. Dude, you're coping. You're coping if you think, oh, we can totally stand up to America because they didn't even win against the Viet Cong, and they're so weak that that we can just, with a little bit of Second Amendment or a little bit of, just Islam or something, or we just have to believe in our nationalism, we can defeat the American empire. It is so stupid. It is such a superficial analysis. It is such a grug-brained, oh, there, look, America said, LBJ said we were going to kill Ho Chi Minh, but then they didn't, and they left. That's like America lost. They couldn't win. They just couldn't do it. America had nukes. Why didn't they use the nukes? Because the goal wasn't to exterminate the population of Vietnam. The goal wasn't to exterminate communism. They were communists in the government. I mean, none of that was the goal. The goal, again, was to test and to experiment and to get and to get data in Vietnam. And ultimately, you look at 2020, and all of these, even the superficial objectives, have basically been attained. I mean, of course, again, China has some influence in Vietnam, so you could say the US versus China thing. To what extent are we integrated with China? To what extent is China this separate thing? That's a contentious point. But the idea that if America wanted to exterminate the population of Vietnam, they could have done that. That wasn't their objective. The objective was to test methods of war. Now, that wasn't the way that the war was sold to the American people. And if you believe the American government when it says our goal is to liberate Vietnam, then you are not very smart. You're not using your critical faculties. If you're buying what the American government uses to sell the war to the American people, then you're acting very gullibly. You're acting as a gullible person. The stated reasons had very little to do with the actual reasons. McNamara enlisted many low IQ troops just to improve U.S. soldier numbers, thinking that TV and reading could raise their IQ, but they ended up going AWOL or doing friendly fire incidents. Cohen is a traditional Irish name, if I recall. Preach it about Vietnam. Can we add stupid to the banned words list? It's making me a little uncomfortable. What other words are on the banned word list? China has to... Yeah, I guess stupid, maybe we should add it to the banned words. What else can I say? I can just use other words. I can say low IQ. I can say gullible. Whatever. China has to pacify Vietnam every few decades. Vietnam is not open because America invaded it. So why is Vietnam open? Again, I'm not saying America invaded Vietnam to make it an open society. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that the American invasion of Vietnam had many purposes other than the so-called liberation of Vietnam or opening Vietnamese society. That was not the only, or indeed, that was not the main purpose. That was the purpose that was sold to the American people in the news media. But I don't think that was the sole purpose, and I don't think it was the only purpose, and I don't think it was even the primary purpose or even the secondary purpose. I think if it was a purpose at all, it was quite low down the chain. It was something that maybe motivated, the people at home in the conservatives who supported the war in Vietnam. But I don't think that it was actually the real reason for being there. So the fact that Vietnam is open today is just proof that America did not lose in Vietnam. What was to be gained in Vietnam? It was the collection of data. It was an understanding of psychological warfare, an understanding of how morale works. It was a vast psychological operation. It was essentially a war game. Now, a lot of people don't like to hear that because that really besmirches the honor of Vietnam War veterans and makes the whole thing seem arbitrary and silly and kind of disgusting. And I understand the emotional rejection that people have of this type of argument because it does a dishonor to those men who lost their lives or those who are scarred by the war in Vietnam. So I understand why people want to reject that idea. They'd rather have us be accidentally losing the war, or they'd rather have a situation where we made a mistake and we lost the war, or we lost the war because we were weak, or we lost the war because we weren't smart enough, or whatever. They'd rather have it be some kind of accidental technical failure than to have the morality of the war be so perverse and so twisted that we never intended to liberate the country in the first place, that you had people high up in the US military who are conducting extremely radical psychological operations that required millions of people to suffer and even die in order for those psychological operations to be successful, for the data to be collected. It was a massive data mining expedition. And in that sense, it was very successful. But people emotionally reject that because it basically says that all the people who suffered and died in that war suffered and died essentially in vain, for no other reason than data collection. And it's kind of sick. It's the kind of thing that I guess there are certain tales about certain Germans who conducted military experiments, health experiments in the past. And I can't really name who those people are because that would target me for, that's a keyword that gets you targeted as a channel. But I will say that this is that type of thing. It is a kind of a war crime. It is kind of a human experimentation, you could call it. And when you put it in that sense, there is a deep sense of horror that rejects the idea on the basis that it's too horrifying to be possible. But I submit to you that is the most logical and rational explanation for the war in Vietnam. My old roommate recently married a Vietnamese woman. Vietnam still maintains control over the extent to which American capital influences the economy, though. Sovereign control is still maintained. Okay, again, my purpose is not to say that the war in Vietnam was to open Vietnamese society. But I will say, as an aside, if your argument is that if your argument is that Ho Chi Minh won and to make his country a communist country, Ho Chi Minh in some ways failed. Even if Vietnam could be said to be a sovereign country today, it's not an orthodox communist country. So the purpose of the U.S.-Vietnam War was probably the deer hunter. I don't know what the deer hunter is. Tila Tequila is streaming. I don't think we can talk about, I don't think we can use words that refer to mental illness. Susan, we have a problem. Let's add some words here. Okay. Bam. All right, we added some words. Yeah, Tila Tequila, she is a victim of the Hollywood and porn industry. Ken is reading the current situation back into the past. I've heard people get into this dynamic before where one person says, oh, well, in the past, the American government actually did the things it said it was going to do. Like when the American government said we were going into Vietnam to liberate it from communism, they were being honest with us, and it's only in the last 10, 20, 30 years or something that the American government has become lying and devious or whatever. But before, they were totally naive, totally open, totally honest. You have a very shallow reading of history if you believe that to be the case. If you search on YouTube for Norm Macdonald live episode, I don't know. Norm Macdonald is kind of politically incorrect. I don't think we can promote him according to the terms of service. See, Norm Macdonald can promote himself because he's protected personally by his fame. So they can't censor him directly, but they can censor you for promoting him. Tom sure likes to fantasize about the impotency of the U.S. Army in many such cases, yeah. Iran has stood up to America by threatening its real power center, Tel Aviv. Oh my goodness. Let's maybe do a little bit about Iran. Let's maybe talk slightly about Iran. Has Iran really stood up to America? Iran warned America and said, hey, listen, America. We're so sorry our General Soleimani ever insulted you. We're so sorry he ever killed any Americans. He killed one American who is an American immigrant who became naturalized as a citizen a couple of years ago, who was born in Iraq, who is an Iraqi citizen who became an American a couple of years ago. and they killed this one quote-unquote American contractor who probably was given American citizenship for like legalistic reasons to integrate him into the American apparatus or whatever. And one American contractor dies, and so as a result, America kills the top military mind in Iran. And Iran says, "Oh, we're so sorry. We're so sorry. That General Soleimani ever did anything against your wishes, America. Here, we have to respond because we have to pretend that we're going to give a response. We're going to attack this base. Make sure you get everybody out of there. We're going to warn you. Get everybody out of the base. We'll send a few bombs." Very similar to what Trump did against Syria. Remember when Trump bombed Syria? I think this was 2017 when he bombed the airstrip in Syria. And he probably warned the Syrian government. He said, "Look, I'm going to bomb this airstrip because I have to. As a matter of course, I just have to pretend to bomb this airstrip because of the fake I can't say fake. I can't say fake. It wasn't fake. When I say fake, I mean fake as in weak. That's the way. I mean fake as in weak. Not fake as in the media isn't correct 100% of the time. There is a chemical attack. Trump didn't want to respond, but he had to respond because of the red line rhetoric that he was using. And so Trump attacks this airstrip. Well, everyone saw that it was not a fake attack in the sense it didn't happen, but it was fake in the sense it was weak. It was a very weak response of Trump attacking this empty airstrip that, basically he put a dent in the concrete and they just paved it over. This is essentially what Iran has done to America. Iran has said, "We're so sorry General Soleimani ever hurt your feelings. And so we're going to warn you, we're going to attack this base, you're going to evacuate everyone. We're going to put some dents in the walls or whatever." They said they completely destroyed the thing. I'd actually like to see pictures of the base. I'd actually like to see evidence of this destruction of the base, or how much money the base cost, or what actual damage was done. But again, killing General Soleimani, you kill the top military mind in the country, would be in America, it would be like killing Trump, or it would be like killing Soros, or killing someone very important, killing Mark Zuckerberg, killing Hillary Clinton. This is such a powerful action that the response showed extreme deference. So the idea that Iran is standing up to America, that's a little sad. If that's standing up to America, that's sad. That's pathetic. From previous stream where I said learning is still possible later in life, although children are geniuses, I mentioned Linguo Steve still learning languages in his 70s. You said this is an exception, but it doesn't disprove my point because Linguo Steve is no genius. Well, you don't have to be a genius to have certain mental abilities. Your point wasn't that Lingo Steve is no genius. Your point is that learning later in life is still possible. Look, the fact that someone has an exceptional ability to learn languages later in life does not mean that is an average ability. And it also doesn't disprove my statement that children are geniuses. So what you're saying there is not an effective argument. Tel Aviv is an imperial satellite, not the main power center. I mean, we can have some ambiguity on this question. We can say, look, Israel is a powerful nation. It is a powerful country. It does have power. It does have influence. Okay, we can say that definitively. In the same way that Germany is a powerful nation. Italy is a powerful nation. Great Britain is a powerful nation. But Israel, as a powerful nation, is it the most powerful nation? Is it more powerful than America? Or something like that? Ultimately, no. Ultimately, there is obviously some back and forth where Israel wants to do something and America says, well, we wish you wouldn't. And so America, in the past, prior to Trump, America has been much more ambiguous, at least publicly, with respect to Israel. Trump is trying to change that, but of course a Democrat's going to be elected at some point, whether in 2020, 2024, some point in the future. Democrats are going to come in and they're probably going to change the relationship that Trump has established with Israel. Whether Trump goes until 2024, whether he ends in 2020, the exceptional deference that Trump has exhibited toward Israel is an aberration in the history of American-Israeli relations, and that is going to be curbed necessarily, whether it's by an Obama-style foreign policy or whatever. But the deference that is being shown to Israel is pretty unique. Now, the alternative argument that people could make is that this isn't true. The deference to Israel is only going to increase over time. If that's the case, then Israel is going to totally annex the West Bank, as Netanyahu has proposed. And I guess it would the next because Israel always has to be in the state of tension. After annexing the West Bank, it would probably also have to go back to the Gaza Strip, annex the Gaza Strip, and then from there expand, probably re-enter the Sinai Peninsula. Would probably be Israel's next move. So is any of that possible? I mean, when you think about I guess it's a question of what do you think about Zionism? Do you think that Zionism is like the chief ideology governing global affairs? Zionism is ultimately, it has a religious component, it has an identitarian component, it has all types of components that I can't really say, but it has a rootedness in the land. And I think ultimately when you look at globalist ideologies and elites, the way they think, they are not restricted to the idea that we all need the Jewish people to live in this particular parcel of land. I mean, I think that is a convenient ideology for a number of reasons with respect to Mideast policy. I think there are a number of Jews who really genuinely believe in Zionism. But I think when you start to talk about the real power players, Jared Kushner has talked about Israel eventually needing to have open borders. Even though he's supposed to be this virulent Zionist, he said, look, eventually Israel is going to need to have open borders and open trade. That's going to be it. If Israel is to survive, it's going to need to exist as that type of a state. And, you look at George Soros is no Zionist. You look at a lot of people, Zuckerberg. There are a lot of people who might, you could say, tactically be Zionists, or they're going along with Zionists, or they're trying to make compromises with Zionists. But the idea that Zionist ideology explains everything, that the purpose of world affairs is to, play this massive chess game where we allow Israel to, it's going to take over Syria. Israel's going to, they talk about greater Israel. So what? Israel's going to take over Syria. Israel's going to take over Saudi Arabia. Then what? I mean, that's the entire purpose. Even if you combine the GDP and oil reserves of Iraq and Syria and Saudi Arabia all together, you still don't have a world power. America still has more energy. You talk about America, you talk about Russia, especially as these oil reserves get depleted over time. And as we develop alternative energy sources to fossil fuels, this region of the world is not on the up and up. This region of the world is declining in fertility. This region of the world, in several cases, is secularizing. This region of the world is being depleted of natural resources. This region of the world is being sucked. Its potentiality is decreasing over time. So the idea that Israel is going to conquer these nations and then rule the world or something like that, I mean, yeah, sure. If you combine the GDP and resources of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria together, then you do have a pretty powerful country. But is it more powerful than Russia? Is it more powerful than Germany? Is it more powerful than the United States? Is it more powerful than China? No. So ultimately, the idea that Zionism determines everything and that America only supports Israel because you have these fanatical Christian Zionists, you have these fanatical Jewish Zionists, that is this ideology that determines the course of history. If we look at things through a little bit of more of a Marxist lens and understand that the United States is a global power and the United States wants to dominate the world, and there is an anti-colonial, anti-American opposition to, America being in the Middle East, which is sort of unique in certain senses. It's kind of a push and pull. It's kind of like America got itself into Zionism, and then as it got itself into Zionism, then the Middle East became more anti-American, and so as a result, America became more pro-Israel because it found itself being expelled from Iran or being expelled from Egypt or being expelled from Iraq or being expelled from these different parts. Also, the Cold War plays a big part into it in that, initially Israel was more friendly with the Soviet Union, but then eventually you had all these countries, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, all of these countries tended to support the Soviets. And so America, as a result, is like, who's our friend? Well, we have, for a time, it was Iran. Prior to 1979, it was Iran. And it was also Saudi Arabia, and it was Israel. So America kind of had to go with the allies that it could go with. And, you could say that part of that was due to the Israelis just having really good positioning in order to put themselves in this position where they could say, we're your best ally in the Middle East. Israel can say that, right? But it's a complicated issue. But the idea that like Israel controls the world is a little bit, it seems to again be reductionist and again ignore people like Soros who are by no means anti-Israel. And there are a lot of people like Soros who don't care about Israel, and they don't see themselves as Israeli or Zionist. In fact, the opposite. They see Zionism and Israelism as opposite to their strategy. So what happens with Israel is unknown to me. I think Israel could collapse or Israel could expand, but in either case, Israel is not going to be the most important country in the world. In any case, like no matter what happens, Israel is never going to dominate the world just geographically in terms of resources, in terms of intellectual capital. I don't think Israel has the capacity to dominate the world as a geographical nation state. Now, outside of Israel, I mean, there's all kinds of things going on. Right now, like we've been saying, you've got America, you've got China, and you've got a lot of stuff happening. So there's just a lot of stuff happening outside of that. I understand why people, because of the taboos around it, and the lack of nuance around it, I understand why people want to respond. In the same, anytime there's a taboo, anytime there's a lack of nuance, people always want to go hard in the paint about a subject. Anytime someone says, well, you can't say this about Israel, and how dare you ever criticize Israel? When you hear something like that, you kind of want it to be the opposite. I understand why people are like, well, if you say I can't criticize Israel, then I'll just make Israel into a demon, and I'll just like forever say that Israel is the boogeyman behind all the problems in the world. I understand psychologically why people do that. And the fact that people do that does not discount the fact that there really are moral and political taboos against criticizing Israel in the American political elite. But at the same time, two wrongs don't make a right, just because obviously the taboo against criticism of Israel is not logical. It is clearly a result of lobbying. It's clearly a result of, all kinds of power that don't have to do with like the truth of the situation. Or, we can distinguish between, when Israel says something like, we're not an apartheid state, is that, I mean, in what sense is that true? Like, we can get into those arguments and we can understand how there are political actors, and there's a political system in place that prevents any type of objective application of standards. Like when Netanyahu called out Trump, and I remember this, by the way, this was probably in 2016, Netanyahu said, Trump's wall is immoral. And so Trump said, look, Netanyahu, I'm going to do everything you ask. So can you please stop criticizing me? And over the last 4 years, Netanyahu and Trump have developed a strategic alliance where Netanyahu consistently praises Trump. But originally, Netanyahu was criticizing Trump. But we can see in an instance like that, for Netanyahu as a representative of Israeli Zionism to criticize Trump, is that in any sense like not hypocritical? I mean, it kind of just blows the mind, the level of hypocrisy for someone like Netanyahu in 2016 to say, Donald Trump has this racist, xenophobic wall. How dare he? I mean, everyone can see the moral hypocrisy there. Everyone understands how grossly hypocritical that is. And everyone also understands how you can't point out that hypocrisy, because if you do, there is a concentrated power that essentially is going to say, like, you can be right wing, you can be left wing, you can be libertarian, you can be conservative, you can be free trade, you can be talk about tariffs. You can be anywhere on any side of the political aisle, and we sleep. No one cares. It's just a bunch of diversity. But the moment you start pointing out these hypocrisies, all of a sudden you lose all your funding, you become blackballed. In the same way, we could talk about social issues where I can't even talk about them because they're so taboo, but we can all imagine in our heads, if I just start advocating for the legalization of murder or something, or the legalization of torture of American citizens, I think police should be able to just take a hot iron and just press it onto the face of suspected criminals. There are things where it's like you say something so outrageous and you're going to be cast out of the political sphere, and we can't really think objectively about those things. They're tied up in an emotional system, and it's a similar situation here. So I understand why people see that, and then they say, well, there's a good reason not to torture people, but I don't see why we should be so beholden to a lobby here. And I understand why people then go in the opposite direction. But that doesn't mean that, like, literally everything in the world that's being done is purely like a question of, like, okay, should we raise taxes or lower taxes? Well, how would this benefit Israel? Like, that's a very narrow view of the world. So to say that the real power center of America is Tel Aviv, I don't think is correct. I think the real power center of America has several power centers. America has a power center in New York. It has a power center in Los Angeles. You could also say that, in a sense, if we're going to go across the world, we could say Berlin is a power center of America. We could say London is a power center of America. To say that Tel Aviv is the real power center, which implies that it is the only power center of America, you're just ignoring, like, the entire rest of the world. You're just myopically looking at the Middle East. And I understand why people do it, but that doesn't make it accurate. If American military is so powerful, why is America losing influence worldwide? In what sense is America losing influence? Everywhere I go, I see people speaking more English. I see people listening to songs coming from America. I see people watching movies from America. So, in my opinion, American influence continues to grow. Why are Chinese people learning English as a native language? Lingo Steve is just an old guy who learns languages and talks about it on YouTube and makes money out of people watching his vids and going on his language learning website. Well, not everyone can be Lingo Steve. That's my point. And children are geniuses. It isn't. Everyone is still learning English. Everyone's becoming more feminist, LGBT, more leftist, more American. Yeah, Menthol Gold gets it. He understands the thrust of the channel. Russians are learning Chinese. Also, Chinese language studies has increased in South Korea. English is mostly the language of international business. Everyone learns English from Germans to Chinese. Yeah, you could say that China is increasing its influence, but that doesn't mean American influence is declining. It means that the world is becoming kind of bipolar, in the sense that everyone's becoming American or Chinese or both at the same time. And it's very much like a repetition of the Cold War. But just because Chinese influence is growing doesn't mean American influence is declining. They can both be growing at the same time, because who's declining? Everyone else. The Germans are declining. The British are declining. The Russians are declining. Everyone else is declining. The problem people have is an outdated view of imperialism. And by the way, most Russians I've met speak English, not Chinese. I don't know where you're getting this idea that Russians are learning Chinese. I'd like to see some data on that, because I believe most Russians are learning English, not Chinese. Although I'm sure some of them are learning Chinese just as some Americans are learning Chinese. The problem people have is an outdated view of imperialism. This is about grand strategy, not about conquering men or taking their wives or something. The Vietnam data mining industry was actually truly massive back then. Okay, Zazie gets it. I wish I could quote some number to illustrate the matter. The Ken Burns Vietnam documentary has some stuff regarding that. Yeah, if you actually start to look into what was really going on, Zazie understands. Iran humiliated itself with recent events. Yeah, big agree. Penn is acting all annoyed about these tangents, but is secretly relieved to get some respite from Locke. Yeah, I'm surprised that I guess it's a Saturday. People want to come hang out. People want to come. People want to come into the chat and talk about some stuff. So I did my hour of Locke, or actually, I did more than an hour of Locke. But anyway, we're gonna read. I mean, I'm just reading the comments. I've done this in every stream. I read Locke, and then I take a break, and then I read the comments, and then I go back to reading Locke. But I think we're probably gonna have to take a break after I finish with the comments. It is a relief. It is a relief to finally get to talk about something other than Locke, because I've been talking about him for like 8 days straight now. The Deer Hunter is a 1978 American epic war drama film co-written and directed by Michael Cimino about a trio of steelworkers whose lives were changed forever after they fought in the Vietnam War. The three soldiers are played by De Niro, Walken, and John Savage. I still don't know what Deer Hunter is about, but it's a movie, apparently. It is the Locke connection. They managed to get a civilian airplane down. Are you saying Iran managed to get a civilian airplane down? Yeah, well, there actually is again, it's hard to talk about theories. Some people are questioning. I don't say this, I don't believe this, but some people are saying, some people are questioning. They say, is it possible that America could have hacked the Iranian missile defense systems and caused, with malware or a virus, caused an Iranian missile defense system with like some kind of Trojan virus to shoot down that civilian airliner? And then the Iranians are like, what the heck just happened? I can't believe, how did this happen? They don't understand what's going on because the Americans have penetrated their technology and their computer systems so deeply that the Americans could do that. Some people are saying that. Of course, I would never report that as a statement of fact that is objectively false because the American mainstream media hasn't reported on it, so that's objectively false. But it is an interesting idea. In either case, Iran has been totally humiliated. They had 30 people die in a stampede at the funeral of Soleimani. Then they had protests afterwards about the civilian airplane because Rouhani lied about it. I mean, look, what Rouhani should have done is said, it looks like America has hacked our air defense system. He didn't even have to say America. He said, some outside power has hacked our air defense system and used it to destroy a civilian airplane. We are investigating this. That's all he had to say. But instead he said, no, we didn't do it. I'm sure, it was someone else. And it's clearly Iran, and now they've had to admit it. So very poorly handled. It's so bad it almost seems intentional. And again, you get some people who are so extreme out there. They'll say like the Iranian government has back channels with the American government. This is all just drama for the masses, and that the Iranian government and the American government are actually in many ways are coordinating. But that's a very that is going very far into the we have to come up with another word, into the theoretical territory, in the hypothetical territory, into the unfalsifiable territory. There are satellite images of the damage to the airbase. Basically, they blew up one building and one helicopter. Okay, well, a helicopter, that's like a couple $1 million, maybe like $10 million helicopter or whatever. And then, they did some damage to the airbase. Okay. They blew up one of the buildings. Okay. All right. I'm sure that was worth killing the best military general that they had. I'm sure that was like an equivalent response. Going up that river was like traveling back to the earliest beginnings of the world when vegetation rioted on the earth and the big trees were kings. An empty stream, a great silence, an impenetrable forest. The air was warm, thick, heavy, sluggish. There was no joy in the brilliance of sunshine. The long stretches of the waterway ran on, deserted, into the gloom of overshadowed distances. On silvery sandbanks, hippos and alligators sunned themselves by the side. Are we talking about Vietnam? The broadening waters flowed through a mob of wooded islands. You lost your way on that river as you would in a desert, and butted all day long against shoals, trying to find the channel, till you thought yourself bewitched and cut off forever from everything you had known once somewhere far away in another existence, perhaps. There were moments when one's past came back to one, as it will sometimes when you have not a moment to spare yourself, but it came in the shape of an unrestful and noisy dream, remembered with wonder amongst the overwhelming realities of this strange world of plants and water and silence. And this stillness of life did not in the least resemble a peace. It was the stillness of an implacable force brooding over an inscrutable intention. It looked at you with a vengeful aspect. Obama obviously did stop Israel from going too far in a couple of cases. Yeah, I mean, he restricted them more than George Bush, and George Bush was not as lenient as Trump is being. What a cluster this is. Fourth D, people dying in a funeral march, civilian plane shot down. Iran is showing off incompetence, whether it deserved it or not. Yeah, and again, I like a lot of people of Iranian descent and whatnot. So I'm not looking to like bomb Iran or start a war with Iran. Personally, I don't have any personal animosity toward those people. I like a lot of them. But we're dealing with these really big geopolitical forces that don't really care what we like or what we would prefer. You know, I would prefer this or I would prefer that. Well, I'm not the dictator and I never will be. So I kind of just have to deal with the binary choices that are given to me. In order, you can support America, you can support China. There's no like third power in this situation. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Smells like victory. Once they rebuild the temple, it's game over. Yeah, I don't think they will rebuild the temple, though, because that would kind of destroy Christian Zionism, right? If they rebuild the temple and nothing happens. I guess they have to wait till they can. You're kind of reversing the causality there, because I think they're going to have to. I mean, they say if we rebuild the temple, we'll get the Messiah. So they have to have like Pope Francis. I think whoever succeeds Pope Francis might be the Messiah. I think the person who comes after Pope Francis is going to create a massive perennialist religion that combines Buddhism and Islam and Judaism. And he's going to go to Jerusalem. They're going to rebuild the temple, and he's going to be declared like the holy. But they're going to have to get the Catholics on board. They're going to have to get the Catholic bishops on board with that. They're going to have to get the Muslim imams on with that. They're going to have to get the big rabbis on with that. They're going to have to get a lot of secular people on with that. So I don't think it's going to happen that soon. So I don't think that possibility, that potentiality is coming anytime soon. I think scientism and secularism and that sort of thing is going to grow among the upper classes. Meanwhile, you're going to see proportionately religious people will continue reproducing, and so they'll constitute a larger proportion of the general population, but in terms of the educated classes will be more secular. So I don't know if there's a pathway toward actually creating a new unified global mass religion. Michael Aaron Kamens, I always forget the order of his name, has suggested that the internet represents the second religiousness that Spangler proposed, which is an interesting idea that like our new religion is pornography, it is YouTube live streaming. We are currently attending a religious ceremony right now on this stream, which is a weird thing to think about it. It's not the combination of old religions literally, but it's this kind of, it kind of snuck up on us that we are now part of a new church that we didn't realize. Project 100,000, McNamara's 100,000 was a 1960s program by the United States Department of Defense to recruit soldiers that would have previously have been below military mental standards. Soleimani was embarrassing. Soros has said Israel was a bad idea. A lot of people other than Soros. Soros is not the only one, but he's the most prominent one who said Israel was a bad idea. If you actually talk to people who are in the know and you have an objective conversation with people who are pro-Jewish, there are diverse opinions. Not amongst like, I think it's like 80% of Jews or more than that have some kind of identification with Israel or feel sympathetic toward Israel. But I think there are a lot of Jews who understand past, present, and future that Israel was not the best idea, and that Israel going forward will not be the best idea. It will not be to the benefit of the Jewish people. There's a lot of, I mean, a good case study would be something like Gilad Atzmon, who calls himself a humanist, and is anti-Israel. So in a sense, like the left wing, the humanist aspect, the humanitarian aspect, the secular aspect, which you could say is not Judaism because everyone has their own idea. Is Judaism an ethnicity? Is it a religion? People can have that debate, but ultimately there are people who are ethnically Jewish who, for them, the best ideology is secularism and globalism. And for those types of people, I think they understand that Israel is an unnecessary contradiction. DPRK never had a top general assassinated even during hot conflicts with the United States. I'm guessing that's North Korea. So, yeah, that's an important point, for your top general to be assassinated in a time of peace. And your response is, we're going to attack your empty base. We're going to warn you that we're going to do it. We're going to accidentally shoot down a civilian airliner. And we're not going to go to war with you unless you respond further. I mean, it's just the most brutal humiliation. Everyone was anticipating that Iran was going to declare war and start, like, attacking military bases and shooting missiles at Israel and, invading Afghanistan, all these things. Everyone anticipated that Iran was just going to go to war because we had declared war in Iran. We had that action in itself, without any words being necessary, was itself legally a declaration of war. That's what everyone anticipated, because it's like, how do you back away from that? How do you do that without losing face? How do you back away from that without losing credibility? So everyone sort of anticipated, like, Iran is just going to have to do this. Now, the other unfalsifiable thing that people are questioning that I don't affirm, again, I believe the mainstream media, but some people are questioning and asking, Soleimani was relatively secular and he had vast support in Iranian society. And there were points at which Soleimani threatened the mullahs, and he said, if you don't put down the protests in the streets that were happening, if you don't do it, I will do it, and I will take over the government in a coup. And they came to a resolution, but I think there was a suspicion among the mullahs, among the religious leaders of Iran, that Soleimani was a dangerous, secularist military leader with vast popular support in Iran. And if he had chosen to have a military coup, he probably could have won. He probably could have succeeded. So there is an unfalsifiable, false, not mainstream, whatever, question that people are questioning. What if there's some kind of back-channel communication between the United States and the mullahs of Iran, whereby they said, look, we can't kill Soleimani ourselves because then the Iranian people would revolt, asking the United States government to kill Soleimani for them. And that kind of makes sense of this whole very confused. It's like, why would Iran act so weirdly? What's going on here? That's one to explain it. That's, of course, false and not falsifiable and blah, blah, blah. But that's something that people are questioning out there. We've got Trump and Bibi's strategic bromance. The 6 million which lives in the States will agree or disagree with you. Whatever standpoint you take, it doesn't matter to them as long as they have reasonable control. Well, I don't know what any of that refers to. I legitimately don't even know what your point is here. They will agree or disagree with you, whatever standpoint you take. It doesn't matter as long as they have reasonable control. Well, you could say that about anybody, right? I mean, I don't know what message is meant to be conveyed there. I guess if you're saying that people will have a public position and then a private position, that they will say one thing in order to maintain control, I mean, that's politics. Yes, people play politics. Okay, all right. Deer Hunter is an incredible movie. It's like 3 hours long. Gonna have to give it a watch. It was funnier to think it was done by Desert Grugs playing war. Don't know what that's in reference to. This is about Africa and it's beautiful writing. Who is it? Joseph Conrad. Maybe that destroyed helicopter was second in command. Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite quotes in books. It wouldn't be done in a formalized way. The merger of religions happens concealed. Yeah, fourth density is correct. Ultimately, that is correct. So my little thought experiment there, while seemingly intuitive or whatever, is not really the way to go. Have to rewatch The Deer Hunter. The Bridge on the River Kwai is my favorite mid-1900 dwarf flick, I think. Well, we've reached the end of the chat. The chat is over and the chat is done. We have gone a total of 2 hours, 40 minutes. We did read a significant portion of Locke. We got to chapter 24, page 317. 10 more pages until there's only 100 pages left in the book, which is pretty exciting. So we're going to stop it here. Quick, spam the chat. We're going to stop it here. We are going to continue. We might be able to do it later. What is Gnosticism? It is a belief that material reality is a prison and you want to get back to your spiritual self outside of material reality. But that's it. Thanks for popping in. We are going to go have a meal. We're going to take a break. We might do some exercise. And then we might be back later. Maybe, you know, it depends on how I feel. The chat, what I had planned is we are going to read the chat. It would take like 5 minutes. We'd take a break and then come back. But this whole thing has been a break. So maybe I'll just, you know, hit the bathroom, eat a little bit, and then be back and then do like another hour. Maybe we'll do like 3 streams today. What do you say? It's anybody's guess. It's spontaneous. See, there's no schedule. There's no obligation. So we just do whatever we want. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And I might see you later today. I'll let you know what I'm eating. Cheers. And maybe we'll see you in a few hours, but that's at my discretion. You never know. Thank you for the 14 viewers and 18 likes. What's the workout? We don't know. It's totally unplanned. It's totally spontaneous. So I hope everybody goes and takes a break, use the bathroom, eat a meal, take a W, go work out, go do something. And then for some of the people this evening, we might be back in a couple hours or something and do a little more Locke reading. We're going to try to get to 327 today. Eat a raw potato. That could be possible. I don't think I have any potatoes at home, but that could be possible. All right. Thank you, Michael. Yes, must know when you're eating what you're eating. No, it's completely, I live a chaotic life. I have no clue what's going on. 14 viewers and 21 likes. It's pretty good. So that's it. I could be back in 5 minutes. I could be back in 5 hours. I could be completely distracted. Who knows? It's a mystery. I'll surprise you, okay? It's a surprise. Thank you, Napoleonov, for liking the video, getting us to 22 likes and 13 viewers. I'd say that's pretty good. So I have to end it there. Bye-bye.